afternoon. Our presentation is entitled Still Segregated, Exploring the State of Integration in American Schools 70 Years After Brown. With it being the 70th year anniversary of Brown v. Board of Education, attention is being drawn to the increasing nature of segregated schools across the country.
While many scholars have focused on the story of massive resistance in the South and the ways in which white parents and families fought integration, the story does not solely belong to the South and can be told for many northern localities as well. In the 2020 census, Boston, Massachusetts was ranked as the 20th most segregated metropolitan area in the nation. The city's school segregation can be linked to the neighborhoods in which people of color are subjected to live in. For many Black and Hispanic families, the idea of moving to the suburbs is a dream, but the affordability of the city of Boston has kept them in the metropolitan area. In most cases, the neighborhoods and schools that these families attend are underfunded and under-resourced, which impacts the academic achievement of the students who attend these schools. Students who attend more integrated schools are afforded more opportunities, allowing them to achieve at academically higher levels. While Boston is not the only northern city to see an increase in segregation since Brown v. Board of Education, this story will showcase that segregation of our schools was never just a Southern problem, but one that has continually impacted all localities in the United States, including the North.
Despite perceptions that racial oppression is a uniquely Southern problem, schools across America were constructed as segregated entities, even in the North. As early as 1647, Massachusetts made school mandatory for all citizens, though people of color were not included. Almost 200 years later, Black leaders gave up efforts to integrate those schools and instead successfully petitioned the state government to open the Smith School, a segregated school for children of color. Our story of Boston's desegregation efforts therefore chronicles the aftermath of the Massachusetts General Court decision in 1856 to prohibit racial segregation in public schools, the Brown v. Board of Education decision in 1954, and their impact on racially imbalanced schools. One of the main issues affecting northern cities was the fact that their schools did not fall under de jure segregation, or segregation by law, but rather de facto segregation, in which the makeup of schools were determined by neighborhood. In fact, legal segregation in Boston schools ended nearly a century before it ended in the United States, which gave the illusion that it was a progressive, inclusive place. However, this sense of inclusion was a facade. Although legal segregation ended in 1856, schools were anything but inclusive. This segregation did not come in the form of students of color being legally prevented from enrolling, but schools remained segregated based on other means.
The Brown v. Board of Education Supreme Court ruling stated that schools that were segregated were inherently unequal. With the excitement of this Supreme Court ruling, many families looked to the NAACP for support as they challenged the state of segregation in Boston schools. In April of 1965, the Kernan report titled Because It Is Right Educationally was published by the Boston branch of the NAACP. The report showcased the fact that segregated schools were harmful for all children. Following this report in August of 1965, Governor Volk put forth a plan for racially balancing the school systems. The proposal was the Racial Imbalance Act that called upon the Massachusetts Board of Education to put forth requirements for local districts to desegregate their schools. These school districts were asked to create racially balanced plans for schools that were impacted by de facto segregation. As the school committee of Boston continued to fail to bring forth a comprehensive plan for segregation or for desegregation, the Massachusetts Board of Education provided one for the school district. The plan included busing thousands of children to various schools across the city, and it was to be implemented by September of 1974. However, those that opposed integration did not take this progress lying down, and soon their resistance began to erase progress that might have been made.
The city's primary strategy for integration involved busing students throughout the city. However, There were issues on both sides of this equation. Some buses were designed to take students of color to schools that had been historically white schools. These buses had rocks hurled at them by angry white citizens. Other buses were designed to take white students to schools that had been historically black schools. However, the white parents of these students refused to put their students on these buses. Many Americans are aware of the Montgomery bus boycott of 1956. This boycott, of course, involves people of color refusing to take the bus until they had full access to ride in any portion of the bus fairly and with dignity. This was not, however, the only bus boycott of the era centered on race relations. More than a decade later in Boston, it was a group of white parents who coordinated the boycott. They didn't organize the boycott to promote integration. Quite the contrary. They organized the boycott in a desperate attempt to keep segregated schools in place. Tragically, these bus issues were just the tip of the iceberg. Fighting within the school building led to one of the high schools being shut down. Black students were beaten or met with violence when leaving their new schools. Signs supporting groups like the KKK were displayed, and buses were destroyed. With the violence and unrest, the National Guard was brought into Boston by the governor of Massachusetts. Court orders continued to plague the city for the next decade as districts failed to fully integrate. Unfortunately, the plans implemented in Boston did little to curb the issue of segregation in the city schools.
In fact, as a result of the incessant demand of white families to mobilize Boston PD, race was not only politicized, but criminalized to the point that Black youth were defined as dangerous in comparison to their white counterparts who were deemed as needing protection. In school, this meant that Boston educators who were mostly white resorted to suspensions as a means to disempower Black students and their families. Claiming desegregation endangered white children's safety, city and school officials weaponized Black students' alleged criminality to maintain segregation, causing the white flight phenomenon where many white families left the city. As stated by the Bill of Rights Institute, white flight accounted for many of the issues still seen today in the city, with the schools losing almost 50% of their student body after 1975, and white students constituting less than 15% of the school population, down from than 60% in 1970. With the continued racial housing zones and Boston allowing neighborhood schooling to continue in the 1990s, Boston schools to this day continue to enable segregated schools.
By the 90s, nearly 60% of Black students attended schools that were primarily or exclusively attended by Black students. And since then, the situation has only gotten worse. This heat map shows the problem of Black isolation getting worse over time.
Today, 7 in 10 Black students attend school primarily or exclusively with other Black students in schools that, in general, are underfunded and under-resourced. Only 3 in 10 Black students attend an integrated school with more financial resources and the benefits achieved from racially diverse learning communities.
Taken together, the story of Boston mirrors the story of many areas throughout the United States and helps paint a picture of the state of integration in American schools. We have a misperception that schools were only segregated in the American South, that they were segregated for legal reasons, that integration occurred when legal segregation ended. As we have seen from the story of Boston, every part of that national legend is a myth. Schools were not only segregated in the South, not even legal segregation is limited to the South. We did, indeed, make progress towards integration, and we have, as a country, ended legal segregation, both in the South and throughout America. But tragically, that is not the end of the story. Through intentional or unintentional reasons, schools have remained persistently segregated through other means. That is true in cities like Boston and in areas throughout the country. And tragically, the trends are getting worse, not better. Though many find it hard to believe, students today are still segregated.
Included on the screen are our references. Thank you very much for watching our presentation.